So I'm Katie, if I hadn't already introduced myself. I'm one of the student recruitment officers here at UA92. And I'm just going to talk to you today about what we'll be going through and what we'll cover in the kind of next 15 minutes. As everyone said, if you have any questions, just pop them into the chat box or the Q&A function, and my colleague Andrew will be there to answer them, or if they're pertinent to kind of personal statements, I'm more than happy to answer them live as I go through this as well. So just let me know. So today we'll be looking over kind of what should you be writing about, and this will include things about structure and also talking about kind of winning words and passionate words that you want to include in your personal statement too. We'll focus upon skills that you've learned in 2020. So as you guys all know, you need to include loads and loads of skills within your personal statement, but sometimes it's really tricky to remember what you need to put in your personal statement, and it's tricky to remember kind of what skills you actually have. 2020 was a really turbulent and difficult year, but it was also a year where we learned so many different things. So we'll be looking at those skills that we learn and how we can put them into the personal statement. We'll be looking at actually what to avoid in their personal statement as well. We'll focus upon how to redraft your personal statement. I always think that's the hardest part of writing anything on your personal statement, is actually redrafting it at the end of it. And then also talk through how you're able to access some one-to-one support regarding your personal statement from myself and the members of the student recruitment team here at UA92. So we'll get started. And the first thing that we'll focus on today is kind of the structure of your personal statement. So hopefully by now you will have done kind of the first or second draft of your personal statement. And you will know that the personal statement is around 4,000 characters or 47 lines. So the first tip that I'm going to give you is to always remember to copy and paste your personal statement into your UCAS application as you go along. So most of the time you'll be writing your personal statement, it may be in a Word document or in Google Documents as well, and it will tell you how many kind of words, how many characters are in your personal statement, but it's always worthwhile to copy and paste it into the UCAS application to see how many kind of lines you've got left to do, or if you're actually over the word limit. It's always worth just checking that throughout writing your personal statement. But we'll go into the structure now. So any good personal statement has or any good piece of work in fact has an introduction and also a conclusion. So the introduction is kind of like setting the scene. So you will start to discuss your motivation for choosing the course, and you'll set the scene and the foundations as to why you're a brilliant student and why they would love to have you on the university course that you're applying for. Then it will go on to kind of different sections. So there may be a section A, a section B, and a section C if you have enough room. Within section A, you could start to talk about kind of academic accomplishments and subject-specific interests. And you always need to ensure that it's very specific to the course that you're applying for. So for instance, if you're applying for sports journalism, you may want to include interests around journalism, English, and sports, and keep it very relevant to the course that you're applying for. Within section B, you could start to focus upon more of your achievements and your relevant work and personal experiences. Relevant is kind of the main thing you need to keep in your head as you write your personal statement, so you ensure that you stay on track, because you want to keep it as relevant to the course that you're applying for as you can. If applicable, in section C, if you have enough room, or if you just have enough of your word limit, you can start to include relevant hobbies and interests. So if you have kind of sports hobbies and interests, you can include those there. And also if you are a mature learner, you can start to focus upon your gap year. So you can talk about why you've had a gap in your education, and talk about what did you do during that gap in education and how those skills that you learn can impact the degree that you apply for. So for conclusion, that's kind of the main body of your piece of work, and then you'll get to the conclusion and you can focus upon what are your future goals and how this area of study will support you. So you've spoken about it, you've threaded through all the relevant skills, the relevant transferable skills that you can bring onto the course, and then the conclusion is kind of like tying it up with a bow, so you can talk about what your future goals are and how this area of study will support this. Throughout your personal statement, you need to have a massive focus on transferable skills, as I've said many, many times. And just one tip is, if you are a mature learner, You need to address the reasons why you have decided to return to education, what has brought you to this point, and then what are your goals for the future as well. It's really nice for admissions officers to understand as to why you decided to return back to education. So on to winning words for your personal statement. So you may be struggling to think of inspiring sentence starters or winning words to demonstrate your eagerness and passion for your chosen degree. You can use these winning words as a starting point. So for instance, you could have reached, showcased, exceeded, achieved, and a few others like that. So for instance, you could focus upon I succeeded in my aim to, or I surpassed expectations by, or my dedication to my part-time job meant that I was able to, ... And these are really good sentence starters instead of starting a sentence with I did this, I did that. And it's really, really easy and difficult to get out of the kind of process of using those kind of quite boring sentence starters. So try and use these winning words for your personal statement if you are writing it, or even if you're redrafting it and you're not happy with the typical sentences structure that you've created. So it's also important that you include skills and qualities within your personal statement that universities value most. So you can use course or university's ethos to support you in identifying which of the transferable skills you should focus on within your statement. So for instance, I'll use a sports journalism kind of example again. If you're unsure of what a sports journalist needs to have, what skills it needs to have, what skills you need to have to join UA92, then you should just Google UA92, or you could go onto the sports journalism course description, and there'll be loads of different kind of skills that you could use in your personal statement and show that you've got those already. So ones that come to my mind are kind of motivated. Ones that come to mind are leaders in the kind of journalism world, great communicators. You've got to be a great communicator to be a journalist. But you may be struggling to think of those different skills that you actually hold. It's really difficult to kind of pat yourself on the back and remember those skills that you use day to day. So 2020 has been a really kind of difficult year, as I said previously, and you will have learned these adaptability, you will have learned initiative, digital literacy. I mean, everyone's been doing everything online using Zoom, Google Classrooms. You'll be flexible, you will have definitely been patient at kind of staying in and observing kind of hands face to face. You'll be emotionally intelligent, you will have done a lot of problem solving, you will be motivated, positive, and you will have great perseverance. So if you are struggling with any skills, with what skills to include in your personal statement, use these, because you can show how you've used them in 2020 already. But make sure you're focused on showing, not telling. So it's really easy to say, I am good at taking initiative. And that's great, but you need to explain, you need to evidence why you're great at taking initiative. So don't tell the reader that you're good at taking initiative, show them you are. Talk about what you've done that illustrates your initiative. And then we go on to what to avoid. So it's really easy to include things such as cliches. So since I was young, or I have had a real passion for, and I always tell students to kind of take these out of their personal statement. So since I was young, I wanted to be a teacher, or I wanted to be a sports and exercise scientist. But the thing is, you didn't know that when you were a baby or when you were young. So try and keep those cliched kind of remarks out of your personal statement and be really straight to the point about your motivation and your passion for that course. Famous quotes as well. So admission staff want to hear what you think, not what a famous person thinks. So avoid the temptation to begin, end, or include a famous quote anywhere. It's really easy, and I used to be an admissions officer. I read a lot of personal statements, and there was always kind of a famous quote at the beginning of the personal statement to start off with. And I always recommend students take those out, because unless you're saying those quotes kind of like day to day, then the admission staff want to hear from you, not from the philosopher or the celebrity of the quote that you've included in. Bad language and slang. So it goes without saying, but avoid bad language and slang. It's a professional piece of work, so you want to be as professional as possible within that, within your personal statement. Complicated vocabulary. So if you can write it simply, then do so, and it's much easier to understand this way. So remember, the admissions team may be reading, well, they will be reading a lot of personal statements kind of day to day. So the more straight to the point and the less complicated your vocabulary is, the easier it is for them. Jokes, so this is a formal piece of writing, so best just to steer clear. Not everyone may see the funny side. It may not come across correctly in your personal statement, so just keep them out. Poor spelling and grammar, so get someone to check your spelling and grammar, as spell check isn't always reliable. I always say to the students that I work with, get at least 3 people to ask, get a tutor, get a parent or carer, get your brothers or sisters or friends, or even myself at UA92. We can check your personal statements for kind of poor spelling and grammar, and also for your structure as well. And one thing I always recommend is use an appropriate email. So there are many times where myself and the admissions team have looked at personal statements and UCAS applications, and the email address that is being used is an inappropriate email. So one that always comes to the forefront of my mind is one that was like whoateallthepies@gmail.com. That's not an appropriate email, and you shouldn't be using it anyway. You should have a professional email for yourself. That being said, try and use a personal email rather than a college email, because if you were to decide to kind of defer a year and you take a year out, and then you come back to your UCAS application, you can't actually access it because it's kind of tied to an old college email address, which you're not able to get hold of anymore. So then we go on to your drafting. So I always find that drafting is the hardest part of any piece of work I ever did at university, any piece of work that I do for UA92 as well. It's always the hardest part because it's difficult to kind of work out what's the best part of this piece of work, or maybe you're thinking it's actually really good, I don't need to redraft, but I'm actually over the word limit, and how do I take out chunks of text over in the word limit. So hopefully these tips will help you in redrafting your personal statement in time for the UCAS deadline. So one thing to do is take time away. So ensure you take a break so that you can look at your personal statement with fresh eyes. So at least have, I always recommend, one night away from your personal statement. So finish it up, watch some Netflix, go to bed, fresh eyes in the morning, and start to redraft it. And you'll be able to see some really glaring mistakes that you may have missed because you're a little bit tired yesterday and you've been looking at it for quite a long time. So the first top tip is to take time away. Second is to actually pretend to be someone else. So you could always, when you're rereading your statement, actually envision that you are the future admissions officer. So imagine you're me when you're reading it, or my colleague Josh, who will be on next talking about UCAS. Imagine you're us and we're reading it, and try to think about what would our response be to your personal statement. So what would we think about you? Would we be happy with the structure of your personal statement? Would we be happy with all the skills that you've listed in your personal statement? Try and think about that. Read your work aloud. That's a really important one. So reading your statement aloud is a great way to catch any kind of grammatical errors or clunky sentence structure, and just reading it aloud helps to understand kind of what you're trying to get at, and it actually enables you to kind of start to delete out extra kind of words, or to check grammatical errors by reading your work aloud. And you can also read it aloud to like a parent or a carer or a brother and sister, and they could tell you, oh, well, I don't like that bit, or I really love that bit, why don't you expand on this point as well? So that's a great tip as well. Colour coding is my favourite one. So I'm always the person with like the big pencil case and got loads of pens in there. So I always recommend to get kind of maybe 3 different coloured pens or 3 different highlighters, and colour code your personal statement. So mark all the writing that you're satisfied with in green, for instance. Then mark the work that you aren't so sure about in yellow, and the writing you know that needs to be improved in red. And that really helps for you to understand kind of what could be taken out, what needs to be worked upon, what's working really well, and maybe you want to expand on those green points. And so it's really great for actually taking some chunks of work out of your personal statement if you're over the word limit too. And finally, get feedback from a tutor, from a family member, or a member of the UA92 team. So I'd always recommend, like I said previously, to ask kind of 3 members of kind of your family, or brother and sister, a tutor, and you can also ask myself as a member of the UA92 team to look over your personal statement. And I'm happy to do so even if you're not applying to UA92. So do just get in touch with me. So my WhatsApp number is on there, and I'm sure this will be circulated afterwards. And if not, you could email me at katiecampbell@ua92.ac.uk, and we'll be able to talk through your personal statement there. So hopefully that's helped you as much as possible with your personal statements. I'm sending you the best of luck in writing your personal statement and finishing your UCAS application off.